Hey, everybody. John here from the Pastor Discussions podcast. This week, we are talking about missions, ministry, and Mongolia. Joe and I sit down and have a conversation about some thoughts about missions, our attitude toward missions as the American church, and what ministry could look like in missional context in our communities. And then I share some things that are going on with me. I'm going to be going to Mongolia to help train pastors there in February of 2019. So there's some information at the end on how you can find out more about that. Also, we're going to be in Minneapolis in January for the Bethlehem College and Seminary Pastors Conference. And if you're going to be there, we'd love to link up with you and sit down, grab coffee, chat, and just get to know you a little bit better. So you can go to pastordiscussions.com/meetup and find out more about that. Episode number 49 of the Pastor Discussions podcast starts right now.
He has wiped out by his grace through faith in Christ your every sin, past, present, future.
Christian hedonist is somebody who says that my greatest joy, my greatest good is God. And therefore, I will pursue that joy and I will pursue that God above all else. So God's glorified and I'm satisfied.
You are now listening to the Pastor Discussions podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode number 49 of the Pastor Discussions podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Joe, and this is your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.
I forgot to check before we started recording. I was trying to remember what last week was. I think last week was 48. Whatever's in the
I shouldn't have laughed.
description.
We could have just said you had a stutter.
Yeah, so it's stutter. Whatever's in the title, that's what episode this is.
True.
Oh, man. So Marina was here yesterday.
Yeah, so we had a lively conversation.
We did not talk at all about what we had intended to talk about. We had started with a plan, and then somebody made a comment. You'll hear it next week.
Yeah.
Somebody made a comment or something, and we started talking about something other than what we had intended on talking about.
Random stuff.
It was a good conversation.
Yeah, it was good.
It
was challenging.
Yeah, and like just sort of another step toward maybe arriving at a conclusion. Like we never really arrived at a conclusion.
No.
We just kind of kicked the ball forward a little bit, maybe. So yeah, that was fun. Marina's gonna start coming on more often.
Yeah, he's probably pretty good for helping us to think outside of our normal.
Yeah, it's sort of the same stuff day in and day out in the same location, and this kind of adds a new voice to the discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was fun. So look for that next week. And we're part of the Bar Podcast Network. You can go find out more biblical content for your ear holes at thebarpodcast.com.
You can also buy coffee.
You can buy coffee, yeah.
At resurrectioncoffee.co.com.
Yeah, resurrectioncoffeeco.com. Go there and check them out and help support church planting in Avondale, Chicago.
Yeah, Dave would appreciate it.
Dave would appreciate it. Last week we mentioned exciting announcement. I'm excited for it. I think this is pretty cool. So I am going to be going to Mongolia to help train the first generation of evangelical pastors in that country with Training Leaders International.
Did you ever see the movie The Quest?
The Quest? No, that sounds like an 80s movie.
It might be. I think it's early 90s. It's a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie.
Oh my goodness. That means it's quality right there.
Well, anyway, every time I hear the word Mongolia, or we go to like Hoo Hot and we have Mongolia food.
Girl.
I always think of the one of the main bad guy. There's like this place that they all go to, and it's they're having a tournament, a fighting tournament.
Of course they are,
sparring
because Van Damme's in it.
And there's guys from different countries, and so the guy that Van Damme beats in the end is from Mongolia. He's this huge guy. He's got a little top knot.
Like top knot, yeah.
Yeah. So every time somebody says Mongolia, I automatically think of that guy. Anyway, that'd be so cool, though.
Mongolia.
Just running into that guy while you're there. Like, feed into the stereotype that Joe has. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So no, I'm really pumped about this. This is really exciting. I've gone on a couple trips with TLI before, and we'll tie that up sort of at the end, but that was a segue to get us to talk about missions. So like, I'm not saying that there aren't times when it's like William Carey and Adoniram Judson and all of those guys that went and planted themselves in Burma or wherever and served those people and loved those people and cared for those people. I guess the question that I have is, when we're thinking about long-term missions, why don't we ever think about doing a better job of leveraging our strengths to equip people that are already there?
Well, I think you've got to make some distinctions. Like, if you're going to an unreached people group, there is nobody there
right
to build into. So for long-term missionaries, if you're going into a place that's largely unreached, I don't think you really have.
Yeah, agreed.
So you got to, I think there's a distinction that needs to be made between long-term missionaries who are going into an unreached people group that are called to be evangelists.
Yeah.
And they're going to set themselves up, and because they want to minister in that community and they want to share the gospel with those people.
Yeah.
That's different than people who decide to go on long-term missions trips where there are churches.
Yeah.
And there are communities.
That's a good distinction.
So you can't throw everybody into the same lump when we're talking about these kind of missionaries, because I think there are people who are called to go and to plant themselves somewhere in an unreached community and share the gospel. And in the process, I would think one of the goals would be to take the local people there.
Yeah.
And as you share the gospel and people come to faith, hopefully they do, you're going to build them up to be able to minister to other people. I mean, it's the same thing that we're talking about. It's so weird when we take pictures. It's like it's like this weird
throws
thing
you off of your
throws
you off your groove. No, I think that's an important distinction, and that's why I talked about guys like William Carey and Adoniram Judson,
mm-hmm.
who were the first guys, or I can't think of his name, Jim Elliot type, where there's and there was even like Paul Washer spent a significant amount of time in Peru, and his focus though was on the tribes that weren't reached.
Right.
And so like I'm not so much concerned with that. I'm sort of thinking of like an occupation type of mentality where it's like, okay, there are existing churches there. We're going to send our missionaries to this country, when there are already people that are in that country that are Christians that can maybe be more effective at reaching their neighbors than we can.
Yeah, right. But it depends on what their goals are in going. So if their goals are to go for a long term to help equip the locals so that they can reach, and that's fine. But if it's got like that white knight mentality of like we're American or we're English and we've got this stuff figured out, we're going to come and we're going to save you.
Yeah.
Versus we're going to come alongside you and help equip you so you can go out and do ministry.
Yeah.
That's the big difference that I see in those two philosophies. So I think you can be a long-term missionary and go into a people group that has the gospel's been shared, but to help equip people to advance the gospel.
There's a whole host of things that need to be considered in that though too. Chiefly among them being that as Westerners, we do things differently. So having gone to church in Romania and in Uganda, the core elements are all the same. They sing, they preach, they pray, all of those types of things. But the way they manifest themselves are culturally distinct. And so I think that part of, if you are called to long-term missions in that sense, part of the responsibility that you have is, and I think that like a lot of like the International Missions Board and a lot of places like that are really do a great job of emphasizing this, but like you can't bring your cultural expectations of church and what church should look like into that new culture and export it as if we're exporting.
You can't go and try to make
it American
culture,
church.
right? Yeah.
Because this is the thing that kind of concerns me at times with our attitudes about this kind of stuff is, we go and we just try to make things Western. Like there's a big problem in Afghanistan and Iraq is, we go over there, we try to rebuild the government to look like ours, or we try to, we try to export ourselves over so it's not just in missions, but my concern is that sometimes that bleeds over into missions. And you got a place where there's a rich cultural heritage there that maybe looks at what church would look like differently. Like for example, in Uganda, church is you get an hour and a half of singing. That's very culturally different than here. And there's dancing that goes with the singing. So if you go in and you're like, hey, you can't do that, that's my sort of, we tend to export our own culture in some cases if we're going. So I think one of the responsibilities is to be a good steward of that gospel message and make sure that those people are able to contextualize their worship in that.
But a good missionary, a biblical missionary, understands that.
Yeah.
So you got people who are really called, who understand what they're going to do. They're going to share the gospel, and they're not going to try to force their own religious practices that are derived from culture that they're from into a different culture. I think called missionaries understand that.
Yeah.
Right. So what then, I guess, what are you seeing then? Cause I think about like the missionaries that we support, and most of them are long-term.
Yeah.
They've gone to equip people.
Yeah.
They're not, and they go and they invest in the culture. They become part of the culture. They don't try to change the culture that they're in. So I haven't seen I know that those other missionaries are out there that we're Americans and we're going to come in and we're going to save your country mentality, that comes in. I know those are out there. But I would say, I think most people who understand missions and most people who study their scripture understand what the goal of evangelism is on a missional standpoint, on a international standpoint.
Yes,
I think what we screw up more so as a church is not so much that but it's more of the local missionary, the understanding that as churches, as individuals, we're still called to evangelize. We're still called to go out and share the gospel and make disciples too.
Yes,
I think that's where we get things mixed up more so than the overseas missions.
Yeah, so I don't think it's so much an issue with the missionaries. If I sort of implied that wasn't my intention. The issue is the way that we think about it here.
Oh, okay.
The issue is within the church and the way church members might approach their understanding of what the missionary is doing. You see what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like we can get so let's just clarify real quick. There are certain people that are called to international missions, and there are certain people that are not.
Right.
Those people that are called, I think, have that. In fact, I think that they become more like the culture that they're going to than they ever realize. So we were with some people in Africa that were Americans that had come over to Africa to help run this university that was training people, and a lot of their behaviors, a lot of their mannerisms, a lot of themselves, and it reflected the Ugandan culture quite a bit because they'd been there, they'd been embedded in it. But then you get people from the local church that maybe aren't called to missions, international missions in that way, that look out and would criticize the African church for the way that they do or elements of their worship service. And then would say, well, why we have missionaries over there? Why aren't they fixing that? You see what I'm saying? Like that type of attitude where the missionary is going to change the people to look like us versus we're sending this person over there to share the gospel, to embed in that culture and that community, to serve and love those people, and to help that church become a beacon for the gospel.
See, so I would agree with what you're saying. I haven't seen that. I've seen more apathy towards missions than anything else. And our role in missions is to just give money.
Yeah.
And to not think about what the missionaries are doing or what their goals are when they get there, or the needs that they might have. Or sometimes we don't even think about praying for them except when they come up on a newsletter or I mean, we do missions month here, so people focus on missions for a month here. But outside of that, do people really think about it?
Yeah.
So I would agree with what you're saying. I just haven't seen as much of that as I overall just see apathy towards international missions we're giving them money. That's our part to play in it.
Well, you said something a little bit ago, which is those international missionaries are going to equip or to partner with the local people. Even when we think of short-term mission trips, like that the church goes on, we kind of,
which for the most part are just dumb. I mean, if we're really serious about it, like there can be value in going and doing like physical work that somebody can't do. But if the ends is just to do the work and not to share the gospel with the people that you encounter and that you build relationships with over 2 weeks, then it's not worth calling it a missions trip.
Yeah.
You went on a service project.
An international service project.
Yeah, that's what you did.
Well, let me, I think that it can become a missions trip if it's partnered, like you were saying with those missionaries, if it's partnered with a local church that exists there.
Then the ends is to assist the person who's working there.
And that's the mentality that I'm talking about that I think is so prevalent in the church that might be.
I don't think that mentality is there with long-term missionaries.
No, I'm not saying it is.
Okay.
I'm not criticizing the long-term missionaries.
My brain is compartmentalized really badly today. So
it's because we had a long conversation with Marino yesterday and he broke us. No, I'm not criticizing the long-term missionaries and their attitudes and what I'm talking about is in particular, the American church tends to have this type of attitude that comes across very subtly, is not overt, but it's there. It's like this American elitism, this white knight type of thing. And so in short-term missions, the way it manifests itself is, and we'll come back to what you were saying in just a minute, but hey, we've got money. Let's go dig a well for this little town that we found out about that. And in digging that well, we are helping save that community, right? Well, when we have the same attitude when it comes to international relations, like with Afghanistan or Iraq, what we did was we sunk a lot of money into building projects that the local people may or may not have cared about, and then and then let's leave and high five ourselves, and we did some great thing. If that were partnered with a local church or a local pastor, and the local pastor was like, here are the real needs in our community, here's how you can help meet those needs. And then the church and the short-term missionaries come together for that week or 2 weeks or whatever. They're working side by side to accomplish this goal for the community.
They just become an extension.
Exactly.
Of the local ministry.
They're lending the credibility and the credit to that local church that's established and that is able and positioned to minister to the people in that community.
Yeah.
And that's where we don't think through these things, I think, very well when it comes to short-term mission trips, because I'm not saying we as Arbor Drive, but we as an individual autonomous church think we'll just go meet this need over here and then come back. As opposed to, let's build a relationship with this other.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
The distinction between long-term and short-term missions, I think, is where I was having a breakdown, is because I think the church, in large part, other than some apathy towards it, views long-term missions, at least in what's trying to be accomplished correctly.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the short-term missions is where we view things as a whole poorly.
Yeah.
Where it is that mentality of we're just going to go, we're going to do something for a while because this community needs it, and hopefully we'll share the gospel and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
But there's no sustainability long-term with that. And a lot of those places that we wind up going are reach peoples.
With churches there.
So if you want to do those things, I think most of them are in third world countries a lot of the times, and they need people to partner along, come alongside them and partner with them. So I would agree completely on the short term missions to rethink how we do these things and try to partner with people, and actually set them up to continue to reach more people in their community and bolster them versus just coming in and doing something that's that's nice,
Mm-hmm.
and then leaving and it having no impact.
And the more I think about it, maybe the right term for what I was talking about in the first part with the long-term missions people is apathy, not on the part of the missionaries, but on the part of the church that sends them.
Right.
So
I would agree with that.
Maybe the attitude is we sent somebody.
Right.
We did our part. We're supporting them with X number of dollars per year.
Maybe apathy may be too strong a word. Maybe it's just a lack of education.
Neglect.
Or just, I mean, how many churches teach on missions?
Yeah, that's true. That's maybe that's a pastoral issue.
It can be a neglect thing too, where people just like it's not
emphasized.
This is what's been set up for the last 50 years. This is how you do missions.
Yeah,
and just like anything that we have too long that we don't think about, it turns into something it wasn't ever meant to be.
And even within the church too, you have maybe a group of people that are incredibly passionate about missions,
yep.
and they're serving on the missions committee or the missions board or whatever. And for, I would say maybe even a majority of churchgoers, missions is not even something that's on their grid to pray for or think about every day.
Yeah.
So those people that God has specifically given a particular heart for missions, I think are a gift to the church because they can sort of reignite that passion or keep that at the forefront and keep that focus where it needs to be. But, I was just, why don't we look at short-term missions trips from the church, from a local church in the context of, let's reach out to these missionaries that we're already supporting that are there long-term. Let's talk to them and find out what they need and how we can help meet that need. And let's send a team over to help meet that need and partner with the people that we already have that are embedded in the culture.
Well, I mean, you could ask the same question about ministry within the local churches. Why do people think that they don't need to be equipped so that we can all go do ministry instead of we're gonna have the select few or the pastors or the elders or the leaders in the church, whatever it is, they're going to do ministry and we're just going to come and be a part of the church.
Yeah.
Versus, no, you need to be equipped so we can all go out together.
Yeah.
And do ministry together. It's the same issue.
Well, I think we need to clarify, like there's sort of like that different gifts type of thing that Paul talks about. There's different gifts that are important and all of them are important.
All used for ministry, though.
Common goal. Yeah. So I would just be careful. The person that maybe is financially able to support things is doing ministry by being generous financially. The person that's able to fix things is doing ministry by fixing things. So I think we need to give space for, I'm not saying you aren't, but I think we need to give space for those different gifts. But I would just,
I'm just saying there's a general
But do we have a passion for going out and doing that?
Right, but it's the same. There's a core issue there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for both missions or doing ministry in the church or tag whatever else you want to it.
The attitude of not using my gifts, but paying somebody else to use their gifts,
right.
or
just somebody else will take care of that. I don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
Type of an attitude. So ultimately this comes down to there's a self-centeredness to us, especially in America. We are an extremely wealthy country,
mm-hmm.
and when we don't get things we want, we can tend to pout.
Yeah.
So take that mentality into missions or into serving or doing or giving away your finances, whatever God's gifted you.
Yeah.
And so all those things come back to, do I care more about me than I care about the people in India or the people in my community or my neighbor?
Yeah.
Do I care more about my comfort and the things that I want to have and the things that I want to get done on my own timeline and in my own way? And do I care about those things more so than this Savior that I have who I'm supposed to care about? And if he is my treasure, then I'm going to treasure the things that he treasures, which is all of his creation.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can really just narrow it down, well, this is your thing with missions. No, there's a deeper issue with us as believers who are still marred by the flesh and still have those things holding on to us. We've got to kill that selfishness and that self-centeredness and that desire to be comfortable, especially as Americans, and say, okay, well, what's God calling me to do here?
Yeah.
And am I going to continue to just be really narrow in my focus and just look inside my own world and keep myself there? Or am I going to take those lenses, those those things
blinders,
those things that horses,
blinders,
blinders. Okay, I was thinking of veil. Yeah, blinders, and take those blinders off so you can see and have a broader perspective.
So, like, what do you think? We live in a town of 9,000-ish people. What could local missions? And we use the term, like, I understand it's not like the technical definition of missions, because the technical definition of missions involves crossing cultural boundaries and stuff like that. Or, but what could local missional ministry look like if the church were rallying around that type of attitude of, I'm going to use the gifts that God has given me to reach people in this community?
Well, it would stick out like a sore thumb, because right now I would tell you by and large, most local communities look like the current culture. Like they buy into or not buy into, but they fit into whatever their community's culture is. So we have a really busy, hardworking culture here.
Yeah,
the church is a part of that, and those are conservative values, and so we live in a conservative area. So maybe Christianity, like if you think of it from just a moralistic or law duty type of mindset, maybe we're not going to look at. I don't think the commission allows for us to be recluse into ourselves or to our tribe.
Yeah.
Like, so if you're going to live out this evangelistic mindset, you're going to look different to the 6 houses that are next to you and those people that live in those homes, because a lot of those people do stick to themselves and they don't go out and chat. And when they do, it's all about small talk. But so if you have a missional mindset and you understand that you're the missionary of your neighborhood, so the 6 to 8 houses or whatever you live in. If you live out in the country, you've got 3 or 4
17
neighbors.
miles.
Yeah, so that's your mission field.
Yeah.
If you're not called by God
or your
to go
workplace or
your workplace, or if you're a student, your school, whatever it is, so you have a mission field. If we would take that mindset and put it into action, that I'm here to evangelize this group of people, and then everything I do in my relationships with these people, I can do a lot of things that are culturally normal with those people. I can build relationships. I can have them over for meals just to get to know them. I don't have to go and knock on their door and say, hey, do you know if you're going to heaven or hell? Let me give you this handout here. No, build some relationships with them. Yeah. Use the gifts that God's given you to open your mouth and just talk about normal things. But is there a goal that you want them to see the greatest treasure in the universe that you've seen? Or is your goal just to, I'm going to
not rock the boat?
I'm going to try, but if I feel a little bit off, or I feel like they're going to get offended, I'm just going to shy away from that.
The reason I asked you that is because it's amazing philosophically how many things align between international missions and living on mission locally.
Sure.
So you serve and love the people around you. You take opportunities to share the gospel. You redeem different aspects of your natural rhythms of life. I've
said this all the time about evangelism. There's people look at it as like we check the box. Okay, I'm going to talk to this person so I can share the gospel. So I'm going to force my way into this to share the gospel with them. And what I've seen happen over and over in my life and in other believers' lives is that God opens doors for us to share the gospel all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's pieces, just pieces of the gospel that relate directly to situations in their lives. And our issue is we're not willing to walk through those open doors.
Yeah.
That He's prepared for us, that we're created to be His workmanship for those things that He's prepared for us. evangelism is a part of that.
Yeah.
And those things, he's prepared them for us. He opens the doors for us to walk through. And so many times we just choose not to do it.
Yeah.
Out of fear of stress in relationship or rejection.
Yeah.
It comes down to it most of the time, which all of that comes back to, I want to be comfortable and I want to be cool. And I want them to see me as the way I want them to see me, not maybe the way that God is going to have them see me.
Yeah. So do you think that same principle that we've been talking about with international missions and short-term mission trips applies within the church? So for example, I've got a neighbor who has an electrical problem. I'm not an electrician. You used to be an electrician. You have that expertise. Do I then, as the person that's embedded in my neighborhood that has relationships with those people, do I call you as a fellow church member, as a brother in Christ, and say, hey, would you be willing to donate some time to help this guy fix his electrical problem?
So I think that's okay if you're going to come alongside me.
That's what I'm saying. Like
it's okay to leverage other believers.
I'm not a general contractor that's just contracting out work to you.
Right.
I'm coming with you into this guy's home as the bridge, and I've brought you in to help with this problem, and maybe he offers to pay, and we're like, no, this is just something we wanted to do to bless you and serve you. But I'm there positioned to be able to follow up and to strengthen that relationship as the person embedded in that community.
I think that's completely fine to leverage a gift that a different believer has, so that you can get to a point where you're trying to get to, where that conversation wouldn't have been able to have been had without it.
Yeah.
But what so often happens is, hey, I know a guy, and then I'm going to ask that guy, and I'm going to send him, and then I'm going to
not be involved in it at all.
I'm going to wipe my hands of it, and I did what I was supposed to do.
Which, again, that goes back to my original point, which is our philosophy of missions is inherently flawed, because that same mentality is, in many cases, the mentality of the church with sending missionaries.
Sure.
There's somebody that's called to missions internationally. Let's just throw some money at him and send him out there. And it's weird. I don't understand what he's doing, but as opposed to having that partnership. And I guess that's my point. Like with local missions, I think a lot of those same principles that long-term missionaries have to think through are applied individually in our neighborhoods, and in a lot of the same ways that the local church is called to support and help long-term missionaries through short-term mission trips. That same philosophy or that same methodology can be applied in the local church.
But my point was that, okay, so as churchgoers, a lot of us don't do ministry.
Yeah.
And part of ministry is missions.
Yeah.
So I would tie it back to, there's that deeper issue of we don't do ministry, because part of ministry is evangelism and missions. Those are just extensions of doing ministry. So I completely agree with what you're saying, that there's a breakdown and it ties to the same thing, but I don't think you can point out missions and say this is the issue. I think there's a far deeper issue, and it happens to bleed into missions and evangelism.
I got you. I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's probably true. It's just a general lack of engagement,
right,
with ministry in general.
Yep.
And because and this is probably a whole nother show, but because what we do is we think ministry only happens at the church, and ministry only happens by professionals.
Right.
We don't see that Ephesians 4, that pastors are given to equip the saints to do the work of ministry, meaning that we all have a responsibility for ministry together.
Right.
And we all have different ministries that God is calling us to.
Right.
And those different ministries, in many cases, don't happen at the local church or with the knowledge of the pastors or of the local church.
Right.
It's individual living on mission. And in every facet of life, whether it's showing up to Sunday worship service and encouraging a brother or sister in Christ, or whether it's, going and introduce yourself to your neighbor.
Yeah, I wonder how much of this comes down to, I don't know how to do it, but I'm not going to ask for help.
That's a good question.
Because, as pastors, we want to equip our people to do ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that equipping happens when they're in the church building.
Yeah.
Right. Or sometimes we're on one-on-one relationships. Well, how much of it is, hey, I want to be able to do this, but I don't know how. So I'm going to send them to somebody who knows how to do it, versus, hey, pastor, I want to do this. Teach me how to do it.
Yeah. And that having that humility to understand that I might not be as a pastor, I might not be the best person to help you with this.
Yeah, that's true too.
Like, how do I disciple my teenagers? My oldest is 3.
I might send you to a different pastor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where that ministry piece happens.
Yeah.
I might send you to a godly man and woman who have raised kids. Their kids are following Jesus and have kids of their own, their grandparents. Those are the right people to send to, but they're doing ministry through that.
Yeah.
They're helping to bless other believers and equip other believers. And my piece was to connect those two, though I might not have been the right person for that. But then there are other cases where, let me just say this: if that's you, if you're listening and you're like, man, I want to do this, I just don't know how. I've had in the last 6 months some amazing relationships and tremendous ministry experiences have come from people in passing, almost sometimes overtly scheduling an appointment, coming and sitting down with me and saying, I don't know how to do this. And in some cases, it's been things that you would maybe take for granted. Like, I don't know how to read the Bible. And that's a barrier to ministry. And so we've just sat down. We've sat down once a week in my office and walked through these things. And for me, it's been really encouraging to see that growth and see how those people are learning and growing. And for those other people, it's been really encouraging because they've been able to see things for themselves for the first time in the Word, or whatever aspect it might be that it's like, I can't do that. Coming and asking, like, pastors love that.
Well, and a lot of what keeps us from doing it is there's just a lack of it's a lack of humility. Like, I don't want to say that I don't know how to do this when I'm from an outside perspective. I'm supposed to know how to do these things.
There's a wonderful lady that I've been meeting with that's been walking with the Lord for decades, and came to me, and was just struggling with her Bible reading.
Yeah,
and we sat down and we've been visiting together and walking through that, and it's been a joy for me, but it's also driven home the importance of how we rely on one another within the body and how we need one another, and how it can be walking with the Lord and being a believer for 40 years can actually be a hindrance. And that discipleship piece where, hey, you're a believer, read the Bible, go to church. That's it. Well, how?
Yeah.
I don't. And so then you just sort of like conform and adapt because you go to church. Well, other people raise their hand, I'll raise my hand, or other people don't raise their hand, I won't raise my hand, or whatever. And nobody's ever taught you how to walk out the Christian life. And so that's what we're talking about with ministry. Ministry, in some cases, is as simple as just sitting down and spending time with people. It doesn't have to be this massive, intimidating thing.
Right. Yeah.
So
completely agree.
Jacob Hansen just texted me and said, hey, we're going to try to come to your church on the 23rd. Are you still going to be working there by then?
You can tell him that he's coming for the Christmas sermon.
Yeah, the annual Christmas
John's
sermon.
annual Christmas
My
sermon.
annual Christmas sermon, exactly. Yeah, so anything else to add on missions, or like short-term, long-term, local?
So I would say for short-term, I think the issues we need to shore up as churches are in our short-term and our local missions fields. Like, do we emphasize evangelism in a natural way? So many people, when we think about missions and we think about evangelism, or think about whether it be short-term or long-term missions, it's such a structured. We have this one purpose, and this one purpose only, and we're going to accomplish this purpose whether God wants us to or not. That's kind of the mentality that we come into it with.
Put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah, and we're going to force it through.
Here's 10 steps to do that.
Like, do we have patience in our short-term mission trips? Like, are we willing to look at it from a broad perspective, have a 5-year goal, say, hey, maybe we got to go back 3 or 4 or 5 times.
That's a great
partner
point.
With somebody.
That's a tremendous point.
And not be disappointed when we go one time and nothing happens.
We're going to Mexico this year. Next year, we're going to Guatemala. The year after that, we're going here. The year after that, we're going to here. Like, one of the things that our church did was with the Kansas City trips. We went there twice, I think.
Twice when you were here, but we I think we went 4 or 5 total.
And when I came here, I got friend requests from people on Facebook that I had never heard of and that were living in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Jim Bender,
Mark
was one of them.
Cummins. Probably.
Yeah. And I was like, who the heck are these people?
Yeah.
And well, there were people that had developed a relationship with our youth through those continuous year after year mission trips engagements, and we were working with the local church.
Yep.
I think that's what we need to be looking for.
Yep. So for that, I would say that. And then, do you have a focus to that you're the missionary in your neighborhood? Is that your focus as a believer? And that do you see that as one of your ministries?
Yeah.
Those would be my 2 things. Those are the 2 things I think we need to think about. I also think it's funny that when we do missions as a church, we tend to segregate by age.
Yeah.
That bugs me.
That's a whole nother podcast episode.
Yeah. So have long-term goals, and then maybe we need to condense it to that. Have long-term goals with your short-term missions.
Long-term. That's catchy. Have long-term goals with your short-term missions.
Yeah. And make a plan for,
and partner with some existing believers
and plan to go multiple times, and then realize that you're a missionary wherever God has you.
Yeah.
And that's part of doing ministry is I'm going to live out the Great Commission, which means I got to share the gospel, which means I should care about the people that God cares about.
Would you agree with this definition of ministry? Ministry is redeeming ordinary, everyday activities to point people to Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's a great way
and share
to
the
say
gospel.
It. Yep. It's not ministry is not this abstract thing that people are going to think it is weird.
Yeah.
Like it's okay. I am a normal. I fit into the culture.
You're not normal.
I know, but okay. I fit into the culture, but I stand out within that culture because Christ is my treasure and not the things that the culture says.
Yeah. So ministry is redeeming ordinary, everyday activities to point people to Jesus and share the gospel.
Right.
That's ministry.
Which happens,
and we can all do that.
Yeah. And part of ministry is evangelism missions.
Yeah,
so,
because you're sharing the gospel.
Yep. So
that's got to be part of the definition. So awesome. Well, couple of things real quick. So we're going to be in Minneapolis in January, the end of January, for the Bethlehem College and Seminary Pastor and Church Leaders Conference. They keep making that a longer title every year. Anyway, it's what used to be the Desiring God National Conference, or Conference for Pastors. So we're going to be there in Minneapolis for that. You can go to pastordiscussions.com/meetup, and we would love to meet up with you when we're in Minneapolis and grab a coffee and sit down and talk face to face. We won't record it. We can just hang out and chat. It'd be fun.
Or maybe we will
record it. Second thing, if you wanna help out with Mongolia, so we were talking about some people are senders, some people are goers. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to my goal is to raise $8,000 a year to be able to fund a few mission trips every year, and with Training Leaders International. And what Training Leaders International does is TLI goes, sets up sites, and local pastors from that area come who don't have access to formal theological training, and they get trained. Mm-hmm. And so the whole thing is we go for a week, 2 weeks, train them. They sit through basically like a seminary style type of class to equip them theologically to be able to lead in their churches. And then it's a 3-year program for them, and 3 times a year. And through that, they're able to better serve their local churches. They're able to better equip their people to share the gospel. They're better equipped to be able to train other men to shepherd and care for the flock. And so going to Mongolia for that goal is to hit $8,000 of support to be able to fund a few trips every year. And you can help out, find out more by going to johnhawkins.net/support. And if you would like to support that financially or with prayer or by sharing with your friends, all 3 of those would be greatly appreciated. So, anything else? I think that's it. Next week, we got Marino.
And I bet you'll enjoy this conversation. I wish we would have, Like we've talked about doing live streaming.
Yeah, that would have been a fun one.
That would have been a good one to. I mean, if you guys would have seen John's face when we were recording this, you would. It would have been worth it. So.
Oh man! Well, we'll be back next week with another episode with Joe Marino. So come back.
Yep. Join us next week for our next episode of the Pastor Discussions Podcast, your weekly conversation on doctrine, faith, and the Christian life.